The sun blazed mercilessly over the Texas frontier, turning the red earth into waves of heat that shimmered like molten glass. It was the summer of 1880, the kind that tested every living thing's will to survive. Dust devils danced across the plains, wild and aimless. From the porch of a small, weather-beaten ranch house, Margaret Sullivan pressed her back against the wall, trying to make herself invisible as angry voices carried from the parlor. "She's eating us out of house and home," Thomas Sullivan growled, his voice sharp with disdain. "And for what? A widow with no children, no prospects, and a figure like—" He stopped, and Margaret could feel the sneer even through the wall. "Let's just say she ain't the delicate kind most men are after." Margaret's hands trembled against her faded dress, the fabric thin from years of mending. She swallowed hard, her throat dry from heat and humiliation. She'd lived in this house since her husband Samuel's death 6 months ago, clinging to the only shelter she had left. But the cruelty of his brother Thomas and his wife Sarah had made it clear she wasn't welcome. "Mitchell's offering good money for her," Thomas continued. "Says he needs a woman to manage his house, don't care what she looks like." Margaret's breath caught. Josiah Mitchell, the name alone made her blood run cold. The man owned half the county, a ranch 3 times the size of the Sullivan place, and a reputation for breaking more than horses. Sarah's voice followed, tight with greed. "How much?" Quote. "Enough to clear our debts and still have something left." Quote. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to cry out. They were selling her, like cattle. As if her life, her dignity, her body, could be traded for a handful of dollars. She felt the heat rising in her chest, not just from the sun, but from shame and fury. She'd spent her whole life being judged by her body. Too soft, too full, not delicate enough. Samuel had reminded her of it every time he'd drunk too much whiskey. His hands cruel, his words crueler, and now his brother meant to sell her for the same reason. Through the wall, she heard Sarah's final words, cold and final. "Tomorrow morning, then. Let him take her." Margaret didn't wait to hear more. She moved quickly, quietly. The way a woman learns to move after years of fear. In her small room, a converted storage space barely big enough for a narrow cot, she gathered her few possessions. 2 patched dresses, a worn hairbrush, and a leather pouch holding her mother's wedding ring, the only piece of her old life she had managed to keep hidden. She touched a faded photograph on the small table beside the bed, her wedding day, a much younger Margaret, smiling beside Samuel, unaware of the storm she was marrying into. At 19, she'd thought marriage meant safety. At 24, she knew better. As the last light of day turned the plains to copper and gold, she made her decision. If Mitchell's men came at dawn, she wouldn't be here to greet them. She waited until the house was quiet, Thomas's snoring rumbling through the thin walls, Sarah's lamp finally extinguished, then slipped out the back door. The night air was cool against her skin, the first relief she'd felt all day. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the empty yard. In the distance, coyotes howled, their cries rising and falling like a warning. Margaret's heart pounded. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind felt like danger. She made it to the stable and stopped. The horses shifted restlessly, their soft knickers breaking the silence. She longed to take one, just one, to give her a fighting chance. But horse theft was a hanging crime, and if they caught her, she'd be dragged back in chains. So she filled a canteen from the water barrel, packed some dried meat and hardtack from the tack room, and turned to leave. That's when she saw him. "Going somewhere, Margaret?" She froze. A shadow stepped into the moonlight. It was Jake, one of the ranch hands, a young man with kind eyes. Her voice trembled. "Please, Jake, don't tell them. I can't stay. They're selling me." "I know," he said quietly. "Heard them talking. Mitchell's a monster. You're right to run." Quote. He pressed something into her hand, a small brass compass. "Head north toward Devil's Canyon. There's water there and caves to hide in. After that," he shrugged, "after that, it's God's hands." Margaret's throat tightened. Why help me? Jake's eyes clouded. Had a sister once. Mitchell fancied her too. We found her body 3 months later. He stepped aside. Go, before someone wakes, and don't look back. Tears filled her eyes as she gripped his hand. Thank you. Run, he said simply, and she did, into the vast, dark desert under the endless sky. Each step away from the Sullivan Ranch was agony and freedom both. Her boots were thin, her legs heavy, but her will burned stronger than fear. Behind her lay the life that had crushed her spirit. Ahead, only danger and unknown lands. But for the first time in years, Margaret Sullivan was choosing her own fate. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Coyotes sang in the distance. She thought of her mother's voice long ago, soft but certain. You got pioneer blood in you, Maggie. Women like us, we survive. Quote. As the first pale streaks of dawn lit the eastern sky, Margaret stopped to rest. She turned once, looking back. The Sullivan Ranch was a faint shadow now, already fading into the horizon. They'll come for me, she whispered, but I won't be theirs to find. And with that vow she faced north again. The sun climbed higher, merciless and bright. Her lips cracked, her throat burned, but still she walked. Every step carried her farther from the woman she'd been, closer to the one she was becoming. When her strength finally gave out, she collapsed beside a cactus, the heat shimmering above her like a living thing. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment she thought she saw movement, a shadow cutting across the blinding sun. A man on horseback, tall and solitary, watching her with eyes the color of winter sky. Easy there, came a low voice as the shadow drew closer. I ain't here to hurt you. And that was how Margaret Sullivan, the woman who'd been sold for her body, was found by the man who would one day tell her she was perfect for his arms. Margaret blinked against the burning sun, her vision swimming in and out of focus. The stranger dismounted with slow, steady movements, like a man used to calming spooked horses. He knelt beside her, his shadow falling across her face. You look about ready to pass out, he said quietly, unhooking a canteen from his belt. Easy now. Small sips. Margaret's cracked lips trembled as she reached for the canteen. Pride and caution warred with desperation, but thirst won. The water was warm, but it slid down her throat like mercy. When she'd had enough, she handed it back, forcing herself to meet his gaze. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man the desert couldn't kill. His face was tanned and lined, a pale scar cutting from his temple to his jaw. His eyes were clear and blue, distant but kind. Name's Ethan Cross, he said, wiping dust from his brow. You out here alone? Margaret hesitated, searching his face for cruelty. She found none. I am, she said at last. For now. He studied her, his expression unreadable. You running from something or to something? Quote. Does it matter? She asked, her voice hoarse. He nodded once. Suppose not. Desert's full of people running one way or the other. She tried to sit up, but her strength failed. Ethan caught her before she fell, his hands strong but gentle. You won't last long out here without shelter, he said. There's a water hole about 2 miles north. I was heading that way. You can ride with me. I don't have money to pay you, she whispered. Didn't ask for any. Margaret hesitated, but she could barely stand. Ethan whistled, and his horse trotted closer. A paint mare with clever eyes and a calm nature. Can you ride? I can try. Ethan helped her mount, careful not to touch her more than needed. His hands were steady on her waist, respectful. Margaret felt the pull of her dress against her fuller body and waited for the look she knew too well, the look men gave when they saw what she really was. But Ethan said nothing. When he swung up behind her, the mare shifted slightly, and Margaret tensed. Ethan's arm came around her, not possessive but protective, steadying her in the saddle. Easy, he murmured. Belle's sure-footed. She won't let you fall. They rode in silence for a long time, the only sounds the rhythmic clop of hooves and the whisper of wind through dry grass. Finally, Ethan spoke. What's your name? Margaret Sullivan. Widow Sullivan, I take it? Quote. Yes. Her voice came soft but steady. Sorry for your loss. She almost laughed. "Don't be." He didn't press, just nodded, his eyes on the endless horizon. The trail led them to a small oasis, a spring surrounded by cottonwood trees and patches of green grass, a miracle in the dry wasteland. Ethan dismounted and helped her down, his hand briefly steadying her elbow. "Sit," he said, motioning to a flat rock near the water. "Rest a bit." Margaret obeyed, too tired to argue. She watched him work, unsaddling Belle, refilling the canteens, checking his rifle, all with a quiet competence that spoke of long years surviving on his own. He shared a meal of dried meat and hardtack, apologizing for the lack of luxury. "Ain't much, but it'll keep you alive," he said. "Alive," she repeated softly, as if testing the word on her tongue. "That'll do." They ate in companionable silence until Ethan finally asked, "You got folks waiting somewhere?" "No." "Then where were you headed?" "Anywhere north," she said simply. He looked thoughtful. "North's a big place. I just need to get far from here." He studied her again, the way a man reads weather signs. "Mitchell's men passed me a few miles back," he said finally, "looking for a woman who fits your description." Fear seized her. "Did you?" "I told them I saw you heading east," Ethan said. "They won't find you that way. Why would you lie for me?" He was quiet a long moment, his gaze far away. "Had a wife once," he said at last. "Sarah. Sweetest woman God ever made. When I went to fight in the war, I left her with my brother for protection. He sold her to pay off his debts." His voice went low. "By the time I found her, she was gone." Quote, "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered. "So am I." They sat in silence as the sun dipped low, painting the desert in red and gold. Then Ethan stood. "We should move on. This place is too open. Mitchell's men might circle back." "We?" she asked, surprised. He gave her a small smile. "You planning to walk the rest of the way? You'll last half a day without water." "I can't ask you to." "You didn't." He packed up his things. "Come on. Fort Defiance is 3 days' ride. You can figure your next move there." She nodded slowly, torn between fear and gratitude. They rode through the night until the horizon turned pale with dawn. The air grew cooler, and a strange quiet settled over the land. For the first time in years, Margaret felt something like peace. On the second day, the storm came without warning. Ethan stiffened first, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Sandstorm," he said sharply. "We need shelter now." The wind rose fast, shrieking like a living thing. The sky turned red as dust swallowed the sun. Ethan pulled his bandana over his mouth and steered Belle toward a cluster of rocks in the distance. "Hold on," he shouted, "and keep your face covered." Margaret pressed herself close to the horse's neck as sand cut at her skin. The world disappeared in a storm of fire and dust. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan's arm wrapped around her, guiding her toward a cave carved into the rock. They stumbled inside just as the storm hit full force. The cave was narrow, dark, barely big enough for them and the horse. Ethan tore a strip of cloth and handed it to her. "Tie this over your mouth. Breathe through it slow." His fingers brushed hers, rough and warm, and Margaret's pulse jumped. The wind howled outside, shaking the earth. Belle stamped nervously, and Ethan soothed her in a low voice. They sat close together, pressed against the wall, the storm screaming outside like an angry god. Margaret's body trembled, not from cold, but from the strange safety she felt sitting beside this scarred, quiet man. "How long will it last?" she asked. "Could be hours," Ethan said. "We'll wait it out." Quote, silence settled, heavy but not uncomfortable. Margaret studied him in the dim light. There was something about his stillness, the quiet strength in him. The scar on his face made him look hard, but his eyes were anything but. "Why help me?" she asked softly. He met her gaze. "Because I couldn't help her," he said simply. The storm raged on, but for the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel afraid. When the wind finally began to die, she realized something deep and certain. The man beside her wasn't just her rescuer. He was the beginning of a life she'd never believed she deserved. And before the desert was done with them, that truth would be tested in ways neither could imagine. The storm had changed everything. When they stepped out of the cave, the desert looked reborn, hills and dunes reshaped by the wind. But the danger had only shifted, not disappeared. Ethan's sharp eyes caught the faint glimmer of movement on the horizon. "Riders," he said grimly. "Mitchell's men. They're still hunting you." Margaret's heart raced. How far? "Close enough. We move now." Quote. Belle was exhausted, her legs trembling, but Ethan coaxed her forward. They rode through the canyons until the sound of hooves echoed off stone. The men were gaining. Margaret looked behind and saw the dust cloud rising, the unmistakable silhouette of pursuit. "Through there!" Ethan pointed toward a narrow crevice between two towering cliffs. They dismounted and led Belle inside. The crack opened into a hidden canyon, cool and shaded with a small spring trickling over smooth rocks. "We'll rest here," Ethan said. "It's an old Apache hideout. They won't find us easy." Margaret sank to her knees beside the spring, splashing cool water over her face. "We can't keep running forever," she whispered. Ethan crouched beside her. "No, but we can keep fighting until we're ready to stand." That night, they made a small fire deep in the canyon, its light hidden by the walls. Margaret sat close, wrapped in his spare blanket. "You should sleep," he said softly. "I can't," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. Mitchell's. My husband's. All the men who thought I belonged to them." Ethan stared into the fire. "You don't belong to anyone, Margaret. Not anymore." The flames flickered in his eyes and something inside her broke. "Why are you so kind to me?" He hesitated. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything you love. Because maybe saving you feels like saving a piece of myself." She reached out, her fingers brushing the scar on his cheek. He didn't pull away. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. "Not the way it used to," he said. "You make it fade." They sat in silence, the fire crackling softly. Margaret's heart pounded. "Ethan, I've been afraid for so long, afraid to speak, afraid to live, afraid to feel." He turned to her, his voice low. "You don't have to be afraid with me." "I'm not." He didn't move closer, not until she reached for him first. Their kiss was hesitant at first, then full of the longing they'd both buried for too long. There was no ownership in it, no demand, only a promise. For the first time, Margaret felt what love could be. Gentle, patient, real. They spent the night together in each other's arms, not out of fear, but choice. When dawn broke, she woke to find him watching her quietly. "What?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Just making sure I didn't dream you." "Do I seem like a dream?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "No, you feel like home." They broke camp early. Mitchell's men would be back, and Ethan knew the desert's mercy was short. They followed the canyon north toward Fort Defiance, the nearest town. But fate wasn't done testing them. By the time the town came into view, dusty streets, wooden buildings baking under the noon sun. Belle's limp had worsened, and both riders were bone-tired. Still, they'd made it. Civilization. Or what passed for it in the frontier. "Stay close to me," Ethan warned. "Places like this, folks ask too many questions." They led Belle down the main street toward a boarding house, but trouble found them before safety did. From the swinging doors of the Silver Dollar Saloon stepped three men, dust-covered, mean-faced, their eyes hard. Margaret froze. She knew that voice. "Well, look what wandered in," sneered Jake Thornton, Mitchell's right-hand man. "The boss'll pay good for bringing her back." Ethan shifted slightly, putting himself between her and the men. "Move along." Thornton smirked. "Can't do that, friend. She's property." "She's no one's property." The words were quiet, but they carried like thunder. Hands moved toward holsters. The street went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then a new voice broke the tension. "That's enough, boys." A tall woman in black stepped out from the general store. Her eyes were sharp, her bearing confident. "This is my town," she said coolly, And in my town, no one gets sold. Thornton scowled. You don't know who you're crossing, Miss Catherine. I know exactly who I'm crossing. And I'm not impressed. She turned to Margaret and Ethan. You two look like you could use shelter. The Desert Rose boarding house, 2 streets over. Tell Martha I sent you. Thornton hesitated, but Catherine's stare didn't waver. Now, unless you've got legal papers claiming that woman, you best be on your way. Mitchell's men backed off, muttering curses. Margaret's knees almost gave out with relief. Ethan tipped his hat. Much obliged, ma'am. Catherine's lips twitched. You can thank me later. But be warned, Mitchell doesn't forget a slight. He'll come himself next time. That night at the boarding house, Margaret soaked in a hot bath, washing away layers of dirt and fear. When she came downstairs, Ethan was waiting in a clean shirt, his shoulder brushing hers as she sat. I talked to Catherine, he said quietly. Judge Harris is in town. We can get married tomorrow. Once we're wed, Mitchell can't claim you under the law. Margaret froze. Marriage? Ethan, you don't have to. I know, he interrupted, but I want to, not to save you from him, to build something with you. Her throat tightened. I've been someone's wife before. I know what it's like to be owned. His gaze softened. Then this won't be that kind of marriage. You'll never belong to me. You'll walk beside me. Quote, she looked into his eyes and saw truth there. All right, she whispered, tomorrow. But tomorrow didn't wait. Mitchell rode into Fort Defiance at sunset with 10 armed men, his fury as big as his ego. They stormed the small chapel where Ethan and Margaret were speaking to the judge. Gunfire shattered stained glass, the smell of gunpowder filling the air. Ethan shoved Margaret to the ground, firing back with steady hands. Stay down, he shouted. Bullets tore through pews. Margaret crawled toward him, her hands slick with fear and blood. When Ethan fell, clutching his shoulder, she screamed his name. Rage overcame her fear. She grabbed his spare revolver and returned fire. One man fell, then another. Mitchell bellowed from the doorway. You can't hide from me, girl. You're mine. Margaret rose from behind the pew, her eyes blazing. Not anymore. She fired, the bullet shattering the lamp above Mitchell's head. Flames burst across the wall. Smoke filled the air. Just when it seemed hopeless, Catherine burst through the side door, shotgun blazing. Nobody burns my town, she yelled, cutting down 2 of Mitchell's men. The tide turned fast. When the smoke cleared, Mitchell stood alone, his face blackened, his empire crumbling. Behind him, Judge Harris appeared with 2 federal marshals. Josiah Mitchell, the judge declared, you are under arrest for attempted murder and trafficking of human life. You'll hang for this. Mitchell's face twisted. You can't hang me. No, the judge said coldly. But the law can. When it was over, Margaret fell to her knees beside Ethan. He was pale but smiling faintly. Still think you can make it to the ocean? He murmured. She sobbed, clutching his hand. We'll see it together. And they did. Months later, under the blue sweep of Pacific sky, Margaret stood on a small ranch by the sea. The salt wind tangled her hair as Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You were right, she said softly. It smells like freedom. He kissed her temple. And you smell like home. She turned in his arms, smiling. After everything, do you regret it? Quote, only that I didn't find you sooner, he said. You were sold for your curves, Margaret, but you were saved by your courage. Her smile trembled. And you? I was saved, he said, holding her close. By you. They stood together on the cliff as the sun sank into the ocean, painting the sky gold and red. 2 souls, once broken, now whole. And when he lifted her into his arms and whispered, perfect for my arms, the wind carried the words out to sea, soft, sure, and eternal.